Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here at this brunchless lecture. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you here in person and on Zoom. I'm Todd Miller with the Brotherhood, and we are starting about 10 minutes late. I acknowledge that. It reminds me of my days at the University of Michigan, where they had a class that was called for the top of the hour, always started at 10 after. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our senior rabbi, Daniel Fellman, who will talk to us over the next hour about reimagining the synagogue post-pandemic, a topic that, frankly, we didn't think would be as relevant as it is now.
Good morning. Good morning. It's good to see everybody. Drew, can we get the projector up? Okay. Well, Zoomland, good morning. Nice to see you. You can see us, but we can't see you right now. You look like a big white wall, so good morning. Todd's correct. When we first started talking about having this conversation, the pandemic looked very different than it looks today. And so I'm a little bit reticent knowing that to prognosticate a whole lot because I just don't know where it's headed. I'm not sure anybody really knows. I can tell you 2 or 3 important lessons that I've learned so far for synagogue life and how I think they're going to play out when we eventually reach a post-pandemic world. I just don't know when that's going to be. So let me begin doing that. By all means, feel free to stop me with questions or comments or concerns. Is there a way to field the Zoom questions? Tammy, you can do it. Great. Okay, so if you're on Zoom and you have questions, just go into the chat, or how do you want to do it? Go into the chat and type in the question, and Tammy will jump up and read them, right? Todd's going to read them. Okay, cool. So 2 or 3 thoughts, and in no particular order. First, I think one of the hard lessons of the pandemic has been to whom do we listen? Do we follow political leaders or medical leaders? And I think too often in our country over the last 2 years, too many people have chosen to follow political leaders rather than the science people. I made a decision when the pandemic first began personally that I was going to take advice from medical and science people, and that I wasn't going to listen to political people, whether they were of my party and my persuasion or not. And what I have noticed over time is that the political world has not helped us in this one. There is no good reason that keeping people healthy in a pandemic needs to be a political issue, at least for me. And so I think going forward, one of the lessons is listen to science. Now that becomes interesting for us as a synagogue. And the question of where religion and science either interact or separate is a fascinating question and a challenging one. For us as Jews, the two can work together well. Other faiths don't quite have the luxury that we have. But I think it's important for us to start with the understanding that we can believe in science and believe in God concurrently. And we can follow science and follow our tradition at the same time. And so for me, opening up a scientific conversation in a synagogue is a good, healthy thing. It is not an unkosher mixing. Whereas if we were to open up a religious conversation in the schools where they teach science, it does become an unhealthy mixing, because then it's whose religion and how does that all get taught. So there's a fascinating intersection that's occurring. That being said, I think going forward, we've got to do a better job of listening to science and trusting science rather than arguing with science just to get our own political point of view across. There is no shortage of political leadership who are willing to use science and anything else to get ahead. I think we have a responsibility to say no to that and to listen to science and to make sure that science is doing what it's supposed to do, which is move us closer and closer to a better understanding of our world. And in that sense, science and religion work well together. So that's the second piece of this. Another thought. One of the lessons I learned early on was that FaceTime and human contact counts a lot. And one of the hardest parts of the pandemic has been the separation that we have from community. And in my mind, the synagogues that have done best were the ones who figured out how to keep human contact going even when physical contact wasn't possible. So how do you do that? Well, there are a few different options. One is using tools like Zoom, where we can see each other face to face. When I started using Zoom, I made sure that I didn't have words on the screen. We distributed prayer books every which way. It was a pain in the tuchus, to be honest, keeping track of who had which prayer book. But the advantage of having faces, seeing each other on screen rather than seeing words, was huge. What that meant was we could interact with each other. And even if we were separated in our own homes, for a few moments we were together. What it meant for me as a rabbi was that I was welcoming more people into my home than I had ever done before. So in a normal Friday night service, I was leading the service from my dining room. And I treated it as such. Welcome to my home. And so I was dressed more casually. I was dressed actually the way I am right now, as opposed to wearing a suit and tie the way I usually do on the bima. Because in my home, I don't really walk around in a coat and tie very much. But it was that understanding that when we welcome people into our homes, there's a level of intimacy that's possible. And Zoom allowed that. And so that becomes a lesson going forward. How do we continue that level of intimacy once the pandemic ebbs? How do we make sure we can continue to do that? How do we build community in a world where we're not always comfortable being physically next to each other? I think that becomes a primary question for us. And how we do that is going to change. Now, the business that we're in now of this hybrid model where we've got people on Zoom and people physically together, I think is going to be with us for a long time. I think this is where we're headed. On a normal Friday night, when Rabbi Gorban and I are at the podium leading a service, we also have a laptop up there with us, and we're chatting with people on the Zoom. Now, it seems a little strange to be chatting on the laptop or on a cell phone or texting people during services, but I have to tell you, I think it's vitally important. I think we can no longer afford to just have a live stream in the back where people can sit at home and watch it passively. I think we've got to have a level of active involvement and engagement. And so thinking about our space, thinking about how it looks on camera, all of those kinds of questions which before weren't really issues, now are. And I think they're likely to stay that way. So the human interaction piece becomes another big element. Beyond that, there are a couple of other really fascinating challenges. One is, because we're able to Zoom every which way, and because on any given Friday night, any of us can sit at our computer and log into services pretty much anywhere in the country, we've got to decide what it is that makes us unique. Now, I can't begin to tell you how many times I've had conversations with people who Zoomed into Central Synagogue in New York or to Park Avenue Synagogue in New York and talked about how wonderful the this or the that or the other was. Now, yes, their music is extraordinary, but they also have a staff of 3 or 4 musicians and 3 or 4 IT people working on it all the time. If we continue to hold our synagogue and compare it to what's going on there without recognizing the differences of locality and budget and all sorts of other pieces, we're asking for chaos. So while it's wonderful to have Central Synagogue and wonderful to have Park Avenue out there as models for us, we can't do what they can do. And the reverse is also true. They can't do what we can do. So yes, they have a production staff. They've got camera people and sound people, and they've got all sorts of stuff. But what they can't do is walk up to you and say, "Hi, Frank, how are you? I saw that your car was broken down on the street the other day. Did you get it repaired?" Or they can't walk up to you and say, "Joe, how you been? I noticed you were walking with a little limp." And they can't walk over to you and say, "Philip, how's your grandson?" So that becomes the added value. That becomes the power of community. It is, what can we do to enhance who we are in relationship with each other? So one of the central roles of the synagogue post-pandemic is building that sense of community and nurturing it. And that becomes, in many ways, our raison d'etre. That becomes who we are and what our unique product in the market is. Because I can almost guarantee you that you could go online and find better music or a better sermon or a better this or a better that any given week. But I can also almost equally promise that you can't find people who are going to care for you more than in your own local community. And so that becomes a part of the equation. So let me stop there for right now. What do you think? Questions, comments? Joe?
Thanks. I was just thinking that you're describing the uniqueness that is Temple Sinai, starting with you and Karen and all the rest of us. That is it. That's the community that we have, that we build with, that we will have going forward. Because there are things that we don't want to change. We want to continue that feeling.
Right.
Ruach.
It's the interconnectedness that really counts. Rabbi Gorbin's a very gifted rabbi. I'm moderately gifted. But I can guarantee you could find a better sermon than either one of us gives without working. I mean, there are plenty of good rabbis out there. That isn't the issue. But having the relationship piece, that's the unique thing that a synagogue does. And this synagogue does it particularly well. It's one of the things that attracted me here, is that we are really good at reaching out and connecting with each other and having those kinds of interactions. And that becomes really essential in a post-pandemic world. Billy?
Well, where I think one of the big issues is, it's a lot of people here have had that community, have a long time of building that community. It's the kids that are our age, that our ages have lost that community. And I think and getting it back, especially for our sons who are going to be bar mitzvahed. I mean, it was unheard of that someone in your Hebrew school class, you wouldn't be invited to their bar mitzvah. But these kids don't know each other over the past year and a half.
Yeah.
And I think that sense of community, and now we need them to stay, I always like to say at 13 plus, and they've had no connection. And I think that's the thing I think is the worst part. Alana wouldn't do BYO. She didn't want to do her first program that was on Zoom. She just couldn't do it. But now we're a year and a half into when she would have been a part of it.
The effect of the pandemic on particular segments of the population is still unfolding. And there are going to be books written about this down the road of, how did being a teenager during the pandemic affect you compared to how did being a middle-aged person or a senior citizen or a single or a married or whatever. With our teens in particular, that sense of connection has been really lost. Extraordinarily so. And so part of the challenge is to bring that back bit by bit. It's not the sort of thing where you can just flip a switch and come back. It starts with the basic hand-to-hand of connecting with people. I mean, it's almost hand-to-hand combat kind of thing. It is sitting down with somebody and interacting with them, and then setting up a follow-up time, and then another one, and then another one. And frankly, because of the way the pandemic has unfolded, we haven't known, can we do another one or another one, because we just don't know what's healthy and what's not. And so there might be a time when being together with 5 other families might make total sense and feel totally safe. And there might be a time when it feels completely foreign, and no, we don't feel comfortable doing that. But our kids need us. And so part of this is figuring out ways around that. So outdoor activities become actually quite essential. I know that today the youth group is going to go skating at Hunt Armory, which is a great place. I've already been there a couple of times with my family. I'm actually not skating because having broken my back once, I don't want to do it again. But once the outdoor rinks open, that becomes even more of a draw. Being able to figure out ways to get together open air, I think, is a huge deal. And interacting with kids, I'm spending more time with families and with kids one-on-one than I was pre-pandemic. Part of that is because they're not feeling those connections the usual way. And so I've got to go reimagine how I'm doing that and reconfigure how the relationship building is happening. Beforehand, and I hope after we get past this, we'll get back to a place of having retreats and weekend things away and Shabbaton programs and all sorts of things. We're not quite there yet, which is challenging. But one of the things that I've been busy doing over the last number of months is drawing up sort of a whole set of how can this work once we get to that point, and what's the roadmap going to be. And in conversations with cantorial candidates as they've been coming in, I've been having those same chats about one of the challenges of being the clergy in this place at this time is going to be dreaming about how to reimagine all of this and working and trusting each other as partners to do all of that. The number of conversations that Allison Yeager and I have as rabbi and president about this precise issue, I mean, Allison and I talk all the time, but if you were to ask her, she would tell you this is a regular point of conversation. We're both keyed into it. I don't know what the books are going to say a generation from now, but I'm positive they're going to be books. And for that matter, I don't know what the therapy bills are going to be a generation from now, but I'm positive they're going to be therapy bills too. Yeah, I mean, let me get to Philip and then to Frank.
So I'm going to ask you a left field question because I'm
Please.
sitting on this side. I want to go back to the science point.
Yeah.
This place is about community, but it's also about belief. But what's not widely understood is science is to some degree about belief too. Science develops over time, and there are peer reviews, and there's evidence, and eventually people believe, they used to believe in a thing called phlogiston, they don't anymore. And so beliefs develop over time. The problem with the pandemic has been the science has had to be very fast, and people have not understood that it's inaccurate in that sense.
Right.
So the left field question is, how can the notion of belief in Judaism help people understand that in science, or is that just a baloney question?
It's actually a really good question, which pains me to say, but no, it's a wonderful question because Judaism at its heart is a religion of questioning. It's a religion and a tradition of wrestling, of looking for answers that might not appear obvious at first blush, but might over generations or centuries become more obvious. In that sense, Judaism becomes a wonderful partner for science. The two interact really quite well because the path that Judaism paves is the same path that science takes. And so if we understand that this is a longer journey and that we need to give time to think and to react and to interact as we do religiously. You know, if I sit down and open a volume of Talmud, I'll read that Rabbi so-and-so says this and Rabbi so-and-so says that, and it sounds at first blush like two people are having a conversation. Philip says X, Frank says Y. The reality is Philip and Frank lived decades, if not centuries, apart from each other. And the way that Talmud functions, it puts it all into one volume and into one conversation, but it's a conversation that takes place over a vast period of time. And so understanding that as one of the roots of Judaism, and I suppose if I was true to my homeland, I would say the roots of Judaism, but I'm not, so roots. Understanding that as a singular central element helps us accept science and helps us see that science is itself a continuum. It is a long-term path from less understanding to more understanding. And that we may never get there. I mean, Lexus used to run this ad years ago. We talked about the relentless pursuit of perfection. It was a brilliant ad. They would do a little ball bearing going on the where a fender and two fenders would come together, or a fender and a door or a hood, to show that they were always trying to get the level of precision and perfection even better. That is a deeply Jewish value. I have no idea if it helped in sales to Jews. It would actually be an interesting question to go research and see. But it is a deeply Jewish value that we're constantly pursuing, and that we're constantly looking for that better place, that promised land, that more complete world. It's also a deeply American proposition, a more perfect union. And I would argue that it's a deeply scientific-based thought as well. We're constantly looking for better understanding, more understanding of how things work, whatever realm of science you're in, whether it's zoology or botany or whatever else, a better knowledge of it. With the understanding that we're at this point in the spectrum, and somebody before us was over here, and somebody after us is going to be over here, and constantly, but arguing l'shem shamayim, arguing for good reasons, for heaven's sake in the Jewish tradition, but arguing for the sake of knowledge, for understanding, not just to score points. And that's precisely why it's important to listen to science and not politics. And I say that as one who spent a lot of time in the political world. I understand why the politicians are trying to score political points on this one. I think they're really harming society by doing it. This isn't a question of arguing about which tax policy is better. That, argue to your heart's content, it's fine. But when people are dying, to me, it is clearly not a political issue. This is a human issue. And I think history will record that to the extent that America succeeded in dealing with the pandemic, it was because we could see it as a human issue. And to the extent that we failed, it's because we allowed it to become partisan. That's my one guess about how this pans out, how this plays out 50 years from now. I hope I'm alive then to see if I turned out to be right or not. Frank?
First off, in the Post-Gazette today, I think there was a very, at least in my view, a very good article about looking at the pandemic. It talked about King County, which happens to be along the New York State border, and what is happening there and the impact of the pandemic, and that less than half the people are vaccinated, as opposed to places like Pittsburgh. My couple questions. Prior to the pandemic, synagogues were noticing that membership was dropping, that the Jewish community was less affiliated. Mm-hmm. Now that with the pandemic, I think that the needs of people to have community are even greater, and therefore the synagogue has an opportunity. And how do we reach out differently? And the other thing is, when we first started with the pandemic, I think we were doing a better job of personally reaching out from the synagogue, organizing telephone banks and so on and so forth. And now we're almost 2 years into this thing, and it's gotten stale, and we're less aggressive at this. Mm-hmm. And should we be rethinking that the issues that existed in April of 2020, 2020 or 21 or whenever it was, are still there today?
So let me answer the second question first, and then I'll come back to the first one. The reaction when the pandemic was at its first acute stage was wildly different. Now, part of it is we didn't know. And so all of a sudden, all of us were living in lockdown at home. And the rules just to go to the grocery store, those of us who went out to go to the grocery store, you'd go fully masked, you'd have gloves. And I remember coming home, going immediately to the laundry room, stripping out of everything I was in, and putting on clean clothes, because at that point we didn't know how the virus was transmitted. And my kids knew that their job was to take wipes and wipe down every item that I bought at the grocery store. And my wife and I knew that one of us had to go to the grocery store, not both of us. And we had this whole long, funny conversation about which one of us it was going to be. She went the first time, was totally freaked out by it, said, "You go." I said, "No, I don't want to go." And we finally sat down and said, "Okay, whose life insurance is better?" And decided that way. It all worked out. But when we didn't know what was going on, and we were all in lockdown, fear was the prevailing reaction. And so the need to reach out to people, to make phone calls, to interact as much as we could was sky high, because people didn't know. As time has gone on, we've learned more about it. So we've learned that going to the grocery store isn't quite the risk that we thought it was, right? That the virus doesn't really get transmitted on things. And that wearing a mask really does make a world of difference. And here I am saying that without a mask on. So the acute nature of being in lockdown and not knowing precipitated a response of, we got to really stay in touch with people and stay connected. As time went on, people began to feel more free. And if you were down in the Strip last night, I'm sure every restaurant was filled with people. And people are feeling less encumbered than they once did. So do we need to come back to that? I don't know that we need to quite go back to the 5-alarm fire level that we were at in the early weeks of the pandemic, but I think we do need to come back around to the notion of the power of connecting with other people and interacting with them. And that actually brings me back to your second question, which is, what's the heart of this whole thing? And the heart of it is relationships. The heart of a congregation is interacting with other people. And Judaism at its core recognizes this. You can't be a Jew in a vacuum. It's simply impossible to practice Judaism alone. It doesn't mean you can't pray alone, you can. Doesn't mean you can't think and wrestle alone, you can. But to be fully engaged as a Jew, you need a community. And that means we've got to be there for each other. And that means we've got to figure out ways through whatever the current challenge is. So right now the challenge is a pandemic, but we've gone through all sorts of other challenges in history. I mean, just over the course of our lifetimes, we've gone through challenges of being distanced by war, by economic either recession or depression, by all sorts of things. And we have figured out ways to overcome all of them. We will on this one too. Just as we did with all of them, the answer is in relationships and how we interact with each other. And that's where a particular synagogue community finds its strength, and that's where the synagogue shines, in my mind, most brightly. When you get a random phone call from somebody saying, "Hi Frank, I just want to see how you're doing." That says to you, being a part of this community, assuming the call comes from somebody within the community, that says to you, your involvement here has tentacles sometimes that you might see and sometimes you might not see. And to be able to interact with people and to have those kinds of friendships, relationships, really counts. It counts in everyday life, but it really counts when we're living under the stress of a pandemic. Ron Wolfson, who's an old friend, has written about relational Judaism. And at the heart of Judaism today and going forward is how we interact with people. Synagogue membership had been going down for a number of reasons. People affiliated over the last half of the 20th century because either A, there was a socioeconomic benefit, they were climbing and interacting at the synagogue gave them context, or B, they felt obligated, or C, because they weren't allowed to interact in other places. So, the country clubs still had quotas or still had rules saying Jews weren't allowed, or this social group wouldn't allow you in. And the synagogue then became, in America, not just a home for faith and worship, but it also became a social home. As Jews have lived in America longer and longer, and as we've been successful, a bunch of those barriers have fallen. And so today there aren't neighborhoods with quotas anymore, and there aren't, most of the clubs and organizations in any given city are open to everybody. What that means is the whole social side of being part of a synagogue isn't the compelling magnet that it once was. And being part of the community has a different, it's addressing different needs. So the synagogue of 50 years ago could get away with doing some social programming and services, and that was enough. The synagogue of today and tomorrow needs to be able to do much, much more. And Sinai is a prime example of that. I mean, if you look at our calendar on any given week, ask Tammy, she knows the calendar better than anybody. She'll tell you, on any given week, we've got social justice stuff going on, we've got learning stuff going on, we've got the nuts and bolts of synagogue leadership stuff going on, we've got worship going on, we've got education going on, and on and on and on. We are focusing on more and more pieces. In that sense, the synagogue has to become a little bit of a town square. And so there are times when the synagogue needs to be able to be an alternative to whatever they can find in the community. So for example, we're working now on putting together what I think is going to be a monthly film series. So on a Saturday night, you'll be able to come to Temple Sinai and watch a Jewish movie. I have no idea what movies they're going to be. My guess is over time, you'll see things that are, Israeli films, but you'll also see Blazing Saddles and everything in between. At least I hope we do Blazing Saddles at some point. But right. Any one of us could go around the corner to the Manor Theater. The question is, what makes this different and unique? And the synagogue of the future needs to be able to say, look, there are some people who are going to get their Jewish identity and feel their Jewish connection by coming here and watching a Jewish movie. And there are going to be some people who get that by going into the kitchen and cooking Jewish food. And there are going to be some people who get that by coming into the sanctuary and worshiping. And there are going to be some people who do it this way and that way and the other way and another way. The synagogue then needs to become a clearinghouse. It needs to be a place that's pulling people in, that's a magnet. And so it's a different model altogether than what the synagogue used to be. What Sinai has working in its advantage is this unbelievable sense of connection already. What typically happened in the pandemic was most places initially, everybody had been sort of on a gradual downshift in terms of membership, whereas the second half of the 20th century was about growth in the Jewish community. The 21st century so far has been more about contraction. Then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden numbers were sky high. Everybody and their brother all of a sudden is finding themselves in synagogue and being connected because we're all alone at home and freaking out. That ended up being a little blip. And then for most synagogues, it fell back down and then went lower than what it had been before. There were a very small number of synagogues whose numbers went up and stayed up, or went up and maybe came down a little bit, but still stayed higher than where they had been before. And the places where that happened overwhelmingly were places that focused on the human interaction side of it. So in a sense, that's why the high holiday gift bag celebrating the 75th anniversary was so important. I think it's important for synagogues to give. We always are asking people to give to the synagogue. It's also important for us to give to people. Put that aside for just a second. The notion of a synagogue reaching out and saying, in the midst of all of this craziness, we care about you, and we're giving you books, and we're giving you a cake mix, and we're giving you candles, and a stone to place in a grave, all of these things that bag had. All of that was saying, we want to connect with you. We want you to feel at home. And even though the world isn't the way any of us would prefer it to be, we still believe in each other. We still believe that what we can do collectively counts. There are relatively few places in this country who could pull off what Sinai did with those gift bags. And it was an enormously important thing for us as a congregation. So going forward, look, it used to be that you needed to have a rabbi because if you had a question, who else were you going to go to? I mean, if it was a religious-based question. Now there's Rabbi Google. And as accessible as I try to be, I'm nowhere near as accessible as Google. I mean, I don't live in your pocket, right? I mean, anybody here not have a phone in their pocket right now? Or in their purse or wherever, right? So that side of organized Jewish life has changed too. Now, the difference is Google can give you the facts. Can Google give you the explanation and put it in context? That's where community comes into play. That's where having a rabbi or a cantor comes into play. And so that's how that whole thing sort of emerges.
How do we is there a new method of bringing the unaffiliated into the group?
You can't Google unaffiliated and find a list of unaffiliated folks waiting to join a synagogue. Nor could you in the old days, look up under the U's in the yellow pages for unaffiliated and find the list. People, overwhelmingly, those who are unaffiliated by choice. It's not that they don't know about what's going on in the temple. It's that they choose not to be a part of it. In my mind, the single best answer is word of mouth. It is each of us individually talking about what the relationships have given to us and how we benefit from them. It's about Carolyn telling her friend or her coworker, I had this amazing experience doing this cooking class with these people, and you should have heard the conversation we had. And the friend's going to think to themselves, geez, I want a part of that. That's the way to go after the people who are unaffiliated. It is by focusing on the people who are affiliated. So on the programming end, there are two choices. Either you aim your programming at people who are unaffiliated and say, well, we're going to do everything we can to do outreach, or you aim your programming at the people who are already affiliated. It would seem a little antithetical to aim after the people who are already affiliated if you're trying to bring new people in. But in my mind, that's exactly what you do. Because the single best way to bring new members in is to have your current members happy and talking about it. And so my sense when I'm doing temple programming is, what am I going to do? How am I using this program or this event or whatever it is to make my congregants feel more connected to each other and to the synagogue? And I figure if I do that, Carolyn's not quiet. She's going to be talking to whoever she's having lunch with every day, right? I mean, she might be quiet to you, but that's because you earned it. In general, she's going to talk. And so if she's happy, she's my best source of advertising and membership and all of that stuff. It's not just Carolyn. I mean, I could pick on any one of you guys. That works way better. It's the opposite of what you might think walking in. And so I think we need to be a place as a synagogue that has multiple points of entry, but also really focuses on the people who are here and making them fulfilled. Because that, I think, will bring more in as we go forward.
We have a couple of questions from Zoom viewers. The first
Sure.
one is, with respect to building community, how does that affect our cantorial search? Are we looking more for a song leader than a performer?
Yes and yes. I can tell you, let me start at the beginning. I think music is vitally important. And I think music is a huge element of the Sinai identity. In terms of what I'm looking for as we're interviewing these candidates, is I'm looking for who I think is the best fit. And I know that nobody's going to have everything. So then the question is, would I rather have these strengths with these weaknesses, or these strengths with these weaknesses? And so until we've met all the candidates, I don't know. I just don't know. I think we want somebody who will inspire us, who will interact with us, who will be one of us, who will recognize that we need uplift and we need comfort, and that music can do that. The mode in which they do it, to me, is less significant than their ability to see all of that. And look, you guys just went through a rabbi search. Some will tell you it worked out well, some will tell you, some will say the jury is still out. There is no perfect candidate. There never is. The question is, who's the best fit right now? Ask me, do I think Sinai's model is more performative or participatory? That's easy. Participatory, hands down. In terms of the pandemic, I think I'm looking for the kind of cantor who will be my partner in all of these things that we've been talking about and interact. I should be looking up here, whoever on Zoom land, whoever asked the question, it's a good question. My sense is I'm looking for a partner who will be able to creatively think with me and together create and craft the sorts of things that will pull people together.
A couple of other Zoom questions.
Sure.
The first one is, what about the possibility of having a meet and greet or getting to know you session with you, Rabbi, so that you can meet congregants?
That has been a really hard part of my transition here. In ordinary times, we would have had, a couple dozen physical meet and greet kinds of things. We had a chance to get to know each other. It's been really hard to not have that. And it's hard actually with the masks, because one of the lessons that I learned in all of this was that the way I do facial recognition in my own head is more from here to here than from here to here. And so when I go to the grocery store, I know there's got to be congregants who I'm seeing there, but I'm not recognizing them because of the way the mask thing works in my head. I'm all for it. I'm happy to do more meet and greet sessions. I look forward to them. We've done some within some particular groups. So I've done a session with the Brotherhood. I've done with Watts. We did one with the Fox Chapel folks. I want to do more of that, and I want to do more for the new cantor as well. I think that's really important. The pandemic makes it hard. That being said, I think we're making decent progress given the constraints we've had.
Then this next Zoom question, what can we do to foster community within Temple Sinai, such as regular programming on Zoom?
Well, so all of the synagogue's programming that had been going on pre-pandemic came to a screeching halt as soon as the pandemic hit, right? Because almost all of it was reliant on being physically together. Once we understood the pandemic better, we could begin to start fiddling with programming stuff. And it has gone back and forth and back and forth. So when the staff sits down every Monday and starts figuring out programmatic things, part of the question is, will the pandemic let us do this? And some weeks the answer is yes, and some weeks the answer is no. We are just about to embark on a much fuller 6 months in front of us than what we've had programmatically. Sunshine Figlio has been hard at work putting together a program calendar. Mara Kaplan has also been involved in that, and you're going to see very soon a whole set of things being rolled out. Everything that we're doing at this point has to be hybrid. Everything has to be able to be Zoomable from home and in person. So, because it's not for me or anybody at the temple to decide what you're comfortable with. And so if you're not comfortable being here physically, for me, that's not a good enough reason to not have accessibility to the program. So the best answer I can give you is we're reimagining the programming piece and we're working on it. We're also reconfiguring how we do it. So starting in February of this spring, the staff and I will begin working on the program for next year. And the plan is by June, July-ish, to have the calendar set for all of the next school year. So by June, July of 22, the 22-23 year will be planned. And by Labor Day, give or take, maybe Rosh Hashanah, you will have in your hands the entire temple program for the year. Now, I don't know if that'll take the form of an app on the phone or if it'll be a physical hard copy booklet or both, or a web page. I just don't know what it's going to physically look like at the moment. But we are planning to lay out the whole thing for the year. Speakers, events, dinners, should we be so lucky as to be able to come back and share meals together, classes, movies, programs, all of that stuff laid out well in advance. The hope then is that we can, with all of this pre-planned, we have a better shot at being able to accomplish it and to bring people in. And it won't be just the main temple calendar, but we're asking Watson, Brotherhood, and Party, and all of the other auxiliary groups to do the same thing. Which means, on the one hand, they'll all say, great, this is exciting, and at the same time, sooner or later, they'll all curse me for doing this, that's fine. But I think taking the time to think through and plan it all well in advance will be helpful to us. Steve, you look like you had your hand up. Hartman.
Looking into the future, whatever that is and how far it is, how do you see our physical plant and what our needs might be to help you accomplish what you want to do? And maybe it's too early to even think about that, but I don't know if you've given it any thought.
I have given it some thought. I think one of Sinai's strengths is that we see this building as a means to an end rather than an end itself. And if you look around at other synagogues in our own community and around the country, you'll see the difference. There are congregations who are just married to their building. And the building could be an old historic building or it can be a new modern building, but they're married to it. It is their identity. And so the question then is, does the building reflect us or do we reflect the building? And I think for Sinai, one of the great strengths has been that the building reflects us rather than we reflect the building. That being said, as we move forward, how we use this building is going to change. It has to change, and it has changed over the last 75 years. I mean, I could start spitballing what ways it might change, but it's just that, it's guesses. If you were to ask me what my wish list would be, having more outdoor space over the last 2 years turns out to have been a really nice advantage for synagogues all over the country. Because places that had significant outdoor space could have people come together in ways that people that didn't have outdoor space couldn't. So how we use the Rose Garden, for example, is changing. Having the ramps to make that accessible is a significant improvement that's helped enormously. My first gathering actually with Watts was in the Rose Garden. It was a Havdalah over the summer. And when the sukkah was in the Rose Garden, we were able to use that space more. So that's one example where the physical plant piece comes into play. This space is big enough that we can stretch out a little bit and still feel reasonably close to each other. I couldn't have predicted that we'd be in this world 5 years ago. I'm a little hesitant to predict where we're going to be in 5 years, except to say that I think Sinai's basic understanding of the role of the building puts us in good stead. Because Sinai's understanding has been that the building should be there to support us, to help us, and not for us to be constantly focused on the building, the building, the building. So it's a little bit of a roundabout answer. I don't know if that addresses it, but Carolyn.
I completely agree with your ideas about community and bringing us all together. And I wonder how you deal with the people who like things the way it used to be. I mean, I think, for instance, of my sister who really wants those words on the screen, and she can't follow the prayer book well, and she doesn't keep, it's hard sometimes on Zoom to keep track of what page people are on.
Sure.
And, how do I explain that I think what we're doing is better? Or maybe what we can do is say page numbers more often. That's one little thing. And it's extremely difficult on hybrid Zoom to run everything all at once. And I recognize the technical difficulties of that. She wants those blasted words.
So the short answer is to say to your sister, so tell me, how's that new DeSoto you're driving?
Oh, don't.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know that's a completely flippant answer, but look, as Jews, we have this tradition that goes back millennia, right? And God gave us the commandments at Sinai, and we know what they are, and that's it. The reality is Judaism is a faith of constant change. And we're constantly wrestling with what do those commandments mean, and how do we understand them today? And so to understand that to be a Jew is to be one actively willing to accept and live with change is a little bit antithetical to how most of us were raised, but is more honest. Judaism does not sit still well. And the classic example of this is a Jewish wedding or a Jewish funeral. Weddings and funerals are liminal moments. They're moments that are profoundly powerful for us, right? They're both, by tradition, really short. A typical Jewish wedding, a typical Jewish funeral, liturgically speaking, is 20 minutes, 30 minutes, on purpose. Because Judaism doesn't like doesn't like standing still. Judaism believes in constantly moving and changing. And when you're standing at a wedding or you're standing at a funeral, you're stopped. You're not moving. And so Judaism says, fine, if you got to stop, make it fast. And then get back going again. And that's the model that I tend to employ in terms of being part of a synagogue. The short answer, what may be the simple solution for your sister, is how can we better distribute prayer books, and how can we make sure that people who need larger print or this or that variation of a prayer book can get it. And that's a piece that we can work on and solve ourselves, and that may be one piece that we're due to readdress.
Is it possible for the screen to have the page numbers?
Anything's possible.
Well, yeah, but I know, but it just, maybe it takes another computer.
It may be. I'm not enough of a techie to be able to give you a good answer, but it may be. And I'm certainly willing to go look into it and find out.
Or even another computer to have the words on it.
Well, so when people are in here, to have one screen that has the words and one screen that has pictures is something we have done. Huh. But if you ask me what I want the people at home to see on their Zoom, there's no question in my mind, I want them to see faces.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the people on Zoom have stopped showing their faces. They just have their names.
Right, but I'd rather have them see our faces here.
Oh, they can see your face.
I'd rather have them see my face than words.
I agree.
And so, does it make it frustrating? Yes, but the answer then is to have a better distribution system of prayer books or whatever it is that we need, so that the person who needs the page in front of them has it, but can still see the face and still get that physical encounter.
But the answer is also to keep listening to comments like this one and try to
Yeah.
find the midpoint among everything.
Yeah. Steve, I think you've been waiting patiently.
I'm known for my patience.
This coming from the man who's going to be the next president. God, I hope that's the case.
I dislike people who use the Q&A to make speeches, and I apologize if this is a speech rather than a question.
No.
I am very interested in reaching out to the unaffiliated. I think it's a longer-term project because we don't know how to do it at this point. But you mentioned something that I think is very important, and that's rather than outreach, inreach. We have 700 some households. I'm guessing that the number of people, as opposed to households, individuals, who show up for services or for any of the various things we do on a regular basis is maybe 200, maybe 250. That means we've got a lot of people out there who are nominally members but aren't really involved. As you said, people being involved is the best way to market what we do, and it's also what we should be doing. I'm wondering, here's the question, I'm wondering if the pandemic is giving us an opportunity, because a lot of those people, all of us, have been cut off, and haven't been having community and face-to-face interactions. I'm wondering, as it lets up, does this give us an opportunity to draw some of those inside unaffiliated people in?
Yes, in a word, yes, without a doubt. There are lots of metaphors that have been used about how to understand the role of a synagogue in Jewish life. The one that has been sticking with me of late has been to view the synagogue as an airport terminal. If you go back in time, go back 30 years, 40 years, before they had jet bridges, when you had to go on the staircase up to the plane, you'd walk into an airport, there would be a sit-down restaurant, usually only one, maybe two. There might be a newsstand, and then lots of area just to sit around. And then they would call you to your gate, you'd go, and that was that. Over the last 30, 40 years, airports have begun to look like shopping malls. And there are all these different things going on at any given time, right? And so when you're on a layover at O'Hare, you've got 1,000 different things coming at you. If you want to just go sit quietly, you can. But if you want to go eat any number of foods, they're there. If you want to get a taste of Chicago, you can. And people are coming and going every which way. The synagogue, for me, works best when we can do the same thing. When we recognize that there are people who are going to be coming and going in the synagogue at different points in their life. And the question is, are we just doing the same old full-service meal, full-service worship experience, and that's it? Or are we offering all of these different opportunities? And so my model has been, let's figure out a way to do all of these different things. And so that the modern airport that has all of these different shops and restaurants and all these different things, that's the model of the synagogue. It's catching people as they're passing through and encouraging them to stick around and to savor it. There are going to be people who join a synagogue and only come twice a year. And then only, or only use the synagogue when they have a life cycle event. That's normative. We can't change that entirely. What we can do is craft a synagogue that has enough opportunities to bring people in, that has more tentacles, that has more openings, more entry points. And I think that's what we do. And the more entry points we have, then the person who's here twice a year sees, there's this interesting movie that they're showing, or sees, I love Blazing Saddles. I haven't seen that in years. They're showing it at the temple. Let's go. What else are we doing Saturday night? When a synagogue starts to do that, and when a synagogue frankly does things like the high holiday bag, people who are members and not involved say, oh, look at what actually comes from this. Look at the different things we can do. And each of those pieces adds to the possibility of increasing the pool of involved, active people. So while we did this wonderful thing for the 75th anniversary this last Rosh Hashanah, we're at the point now where we have to sort of stop patting ourselves on the back and start thinking about what the next thing's going to be. Because it's each of those elements that are going to draw our less active members in and are going to draw people who are unaffiliated in, saying, look what Sinai does. Look what being part of that community can give to my life. And that's the piece. That's why I focus on what we're doing for our own members, because there's nothing that can top the individual endorsement of a person who went to a Sinai event or was involved in some Sinai activity and felt moved. That, there's no question, that is hands down the best outreach we can do. And so my sense is focus on who's here, focus on what we're doing internally, and what we'll see over time is that core will begin to expand. There'll be times when it expands by big amounts and times when it's barely perceptible. But if you look at it over a 10-year period or a 5-year period, you'll see that very clearly there's a path there. And you can look at almost any synagogue in the country over the last 5 years. Actually, if you were to go 5 years pre-pandemic, you can see the synagogue's involvement levels and how they did it and see the strength or weakness of it based on that evaluation. So pick any synagogue in the country and look at the years 2014 to 2019. And you can see the ones who focused on who they were internally and enhanced who they were and made their congregants feel better versus those who tried to reach out to those who weren't connected. And overwhelmingly, the ones who brought in new members were the ones who reached out to their current members. We live in an age of connection, of interaction. People know what's going on. It's not that they don't know that Sinai exists. I mean, people drive by Forbes every day. They see the sign. They know it's not that we're hidden. It's that people don't recognize what this product can give to them in their lives. And so in that sense, it's how do we, I'm going to sound much more business-minded than I probably am, but how do we market ourselves and how do we turn our members into individual marketing machines? That becomes the path forward. And that sounds way more crass than I mean it to. I don't mean it to be crass at all. But it's that, it's the human interaction. It's sitting at work on a Tuesday and saying, I went to this really cool thing last night. And the coworker saying, well, tell me about it. That's how this stuff happens. I don't even know where we are, Todd.
Well, there are no more questions, so feel free to wrap up.
Thank you. If you had asked me 2 years ago if I thought that my future was going to be in Pittsburgh, I would have looked at you and said, doing what? But this place is a true gem. And every day, Melissa and I look at each other and say, how did we get this lucky? How did this all happen? And being a part of a community that gets it the way Sinai does is an extraordinary gift. And I can tell you, having talked now with 2 of the cantors in depth and the third one a little bit, the cantorial candidates are seeing it. And they're recognizing what exists now here and what's possible here. And that is all about all of you. I'm the newbie in that regard. It's about what you guys have created. And so thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of it. And I'm looking forward to being partners for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Fellman, for sharing your time and insights with us. And I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we're fortunate to have you and your family as part of the congregation. So thank you all for being here this morning, and thank you to those of you watching on Zoom. We have some upcoming programs I'd like to mention briefly. On Sunday, January 23rd, we'll have our next Brunchless lecture, and the title of that is, it's in conjunction with Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month, and it's engaging adults with disabilities in community life. And that will be a panel discussion with actually 5 Sinai members, Mara Kaplan, Carol Tabus, and Hanita Kozovsky, all of whom have adult children with disabilities. And we'll also be joined by Nancy Gale, former Temple Sinai president, and Allison Karabin, both of whom are with Jewish Residential Services and deal extensively with adults with disabilities. And that's Sunday, January 23rd from 10 to 11 a.m. And before that, on Wednesday, January 12th, we have a special program here in Falk Auditorium, little baseball in the dead of winter. This is a program in conjunction with about 15 Reform and Conservative congregations nationwide, and a Zoom program being moderated by Jonathan Mayo, who many of you know. He's with the Major League Baseball Network and lives here in Squirrel Hill. And that is an evening with Ron Blomberg, a former Yankees baseball player who has the distinction of being baseball's first designated hitter. And he recently wrote a book about his relationship with his teammate Thurman Munson, an all-star catcher who tragically died in a plane crash practicing takeoffs and landings at the Akron-Canton, Ohio airport. So 2 Brotherhood programs in the month of January. And again, thank you for being here this morning, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and have a happy and healthy New Year's celebration. We'll see you in 2022.